And on that piece of paper throughout the course of this sermon, I hope that you guys are able to be convicted enough and shatter your pride and possibly write down a sin dealing with pride, or just any sin in particular, that you write down on that sheet of paper and fold it in half. And I'm going to tell you what to do with that after we're done. But if you feel any conviction within your heart of any kind of sin that you have, specifically dealing with pride, and almost every sin deals with pride anyways, write it down and fold it in half, and then we'll deal afterwards with what you're going to do with that. But speaking of pride, I wanted to today, first, on Friday night, I was here for many hours. I did a lot of shoveling. I didn't want to snow blow because the neighbors might get a little angry at us for that at something past 9 o'clock, even if it's a Friday night. I get a text from my friend Amber. She asked me something concerning what her friends are listening to, and she's really concerned about her friends and, you know, the people that they're listening to. And she's like, "Nick, I need your wisdom." Now, I'm not going to lie. This 2 nights ago, I had to deal with the issue of, oh wow, that sounds nice. I'm wise. I like that sound. I'm wise. A fellow peer of mine, my age, says, "Nick, you're wise. I need your wisdom." Pride was definitely creeping at the door there that night, 2 nights ago. And I know exactly how many times is it that we get to the point where we hear any kind of compliment, and it feels so good, and it kind of builds us up, and we start to kind of look at ourselves in a way. We kind of boast in what we are, or what we have, or what we can offer. I had to deal with that 2 nights ago. I understand what it means to be proud of it. Now, before I go on to pride and what I'm talking about today, let me be quite plain. We're not talking. There are different definitions of pride, different ways of looking at it. If you say that I'm proud of my son for playing football in a good way, that's a good thing. You're boasting in someone else and what their accomplishments are, not necessarily what yours are, or take pride in your work. That's a great thing too, because in essence, what you're doing is you're doing work that's not in a lackadaisical form. You're not doing lazy work. You take pride in your work. So I'm not dealing with certain aspects of pride in those senses. I'm dealing with pride in its strictest definition, what we always kind of think of. I'm going to give you it in essence. Pride is putting yourself above what you actually are. It's putting yourself above what you actually are. And to put it simpler, it is what I would call self-exaltation. When you have pride, you put yourself above what you actually are. That is, you're self-exalting. You put yourself on a pedestal you don't need to be putting yourself on. So, that's a very strict definition. Now, the question is, do we do that in life? Even in the littlest manner. Let's ask a few questions to help us understand where pride fits in. Number one, when you were born, who fed you? You or your caretakers or your parents? I can guarantee everyone in this congregation who was once a baby was fed by another person, or else they would have died off. You weren't fed by yourself. You didn't pull up your own bootstraps and do what you needed to do to survive as a little infant. No, you didn't. You were fed by another human being. What about when you were taught anything, whether it's math or science or anything in this world, something for your career? Who taught you it? You didn't just have that knowledge, right? Someone gave it to you. Even if you read it out of a book and you didn't have a formal teacher, you still read it out of a book. It came from somewhere else. It's not, so therefore you can't boast about what you learned because it was given to you. What about being married? There's a bunch of people in this congregation that are married. Why are you married if you don't need a helpmate? What's the point of being married if we are so independent and we are so great? Why do we get married and have someone else help us out in the journey of life? Is there any room for boasting if we're married? No. Because we have someone helping joining us? What about going to church? Why are we going to church? What does Jesus say about church? What does he say about what he came for? He said, I came for the sick, not for the healthy. So the very fact that every one of us is in this building right now means one thing. We're admitting that we are sick and we need Jesus. There's no room for boasting in that. What about our salvation? Who earned it? You? Give me a break. No, you did not. And what about your talents? Do you have any talents at all? I know I have some talents. Who gave them to you? Yes, you may have nurtured your talents. You may have worked hard. But if you can draw real good, for example, if you have that accurate hand, that in no way is something to boast about because that was given to you by God himself. So, newsflash. We are not all that in a bag of chips. We're not. We have no room for boasting. Everything that we have in life was in a sense given to us from another. So when we use language about what we've acquired in life, it shouldn't be I did or I took or I handled or me or I. It should be I was given. I was given. I was given. I inherited. Someone else gave it to me. You see, all of life is based upon one thing, and that's grace. Gifts from another human being. That's what life is based upon. So, on that note, I want to let you know how slippery and elusive pride can be. So, you ever see that mole game? Where you see the moles pop out of the hole, and you take some sort of hammer, and you kind of hit it, and every time it pops out of the hole, you're hitting at that mole, right? But every time you hit it, there's one that pops out in another end. Okay? That's how pride is. It pops out in one area of life, you hit it down, and then if you keep doing it, you're going to get really tired. Pride is also like sand. If you grab at sand, no matter how much you grab at it, there will always be sand that falls out of your hand. Anyone ever try to grab a handful of sand? You know every single time some sand will fall out. That's how pride is. It's slippery, it's elusive, and it will take a human being by storm, and it will not relent. One way in which it does this is, if you think about who you are as a person, what you need, what you want to be loved, you want to be respected, you want to be given a certain amount of dignity as a human being. So what do you do as a human being? You seek that in a sense. Sometimes we get married for that reason. But in reality, let's be honest, sometimes we overcompensate, kind of like a teeter-totter. You got a real big kid at one end, and you got a lighter kid at the other. Sometimes pride is this way. You try to even things out and try to make yourself feel better and even everything out, but then you put an even bigger kid at the other end and it goes the other way. You try to overcompensate from pride by giving what you need, allowing yourself to be given what you need. Pride is so elusive because in essence, it's self-exaltation. We need to be loved and honored. We need that as human beings. We need to feel valued, but we overcompensate very often. It's a very dangerous thing to deal with pride. So, one way in which, let me give you one more example of the way in which we do it, but comparing ourselves to the Joneses. That's such a common statement about who we are. I'm going to tell you one thing right now. We do that in so many ways we don't even realize as Americans. There are Joneses out there. We compare ourselves to human beings so often, and it's so easy to be tripped up in that. So, whether you're filled with pride, or whether you're fighting it, but you're probably losing because if you're fighting pride, you're hitting it down like a mole in the mole game, but it's popping up in some other area. Because in reality, pride will always pop up. And it's the root of every other sin. So whether we're either fighting it or giving into it, neither one sounds like a blessed life. The fact is, we're still struggling with pride, and that does not sound like a blessing to me. whether we're fighting it or whether we have it. Well, what does sound like a blessed life? Well, Jesus puts it this way. He said, "Blessed are the meek, for they shall inherit the earth." Okay, so Jesus says that. Now, back in December, I talked about meekness being a powerful weapon that would defeat darkness in spiritual warfare. Was I giving a cheap answer? I was not. Weakness is not just, I didn't just fill it in to finish that fourth sermon in December. When I talked about that, when I talked about meekness, I meant what I said. It defeats the root of sin. But the thing about meekness is it itself is a symptom. It has a root itself. But before we get into that, let me talk a little bit about the verse that I just quoted from Jesus. Jesus says, "Blessed are the meek, for they shall inherit the earth." Right? Now, I want you to understand something about how powerful of a statement that is in his context. He's talking to Jews, and these Jews are being in their own promised land of Canaan. They have the Romans ruling over them. That by them was considered a curse, not a blessing. Jesus comes along the line and says, "Blessed are the meek, for they shall inherit the earth." Now, if you look up the word meek, there's different, in a lexicon, in a Greek lexicon, it has certain definitions, and they're all kind of the same things. Humble, gentle, forbearing, forgiving, benevolent, stuff like that. And in essence, it's to be humble. So Jesus comes on the scene, and he tells Jews, who, by the way, I want to remind you of the Jews' history. Not about 200 years earlier, they had a clear remembrance of the Maccabean brothers. If you're a former Catholic, you might know what the book of First and Second Maccabees are. Well, in the history of the Jews, the Maccabean brothers took over. As a small army, they led a small army of Jews who took the temple back over from this guy by the name of Antiochus IV. Okay? Antiochus IV went into the temple, desecrated the temple of the Jews, and the Maccabean brothers took it back. And they celebrate that, and that's where we get Hanukkah from. So when Jews celebrate Hanukkah, they celebrate the Maccabean brothers taking the temple back over. Now, so the whole idea is if you're going to fight against your enemies, and in that case it was Antiochus IV, and during Jesus' days, the Romans, what do you have to do? You got to take what's yours. Because it's God promised it to you. He promised the land to you. Right? And then Jesus comes on the scene, and what does he say? "Blessed are the gentle," or "Blessed are the forgiving," "Blessed are the forbearing," "Blessed are the meek," "Blessed are the humble, for they shall inherit the earth." Now, the word earth in this verse can also refer to land. And if you, we'll get into later, it can refer to land. So when a Jew heard, "Blessed are the meek, for they shall inherit the earth," here's what a Jew is hearing. This guy's supposed to be the Messiah, and he's telling us not to fight against the Romans and take the promised land that was promised to us. How do we, don't we often say the same thing? That's ours and we deserve it. We deserve it so much that we'll fight for it. So we don't take a meek attitude. We take the bull by its horns, pull up your bootstraps and take what's yours because it's owed to you. That's not a meek mentality. Jesus tells these guys and girls, you've got to be meek and then you'll inherit the promised land. This is extremely powerful and counterintuitive. These guys don't know what to do with this. So, the question is, why does Jesus say that? Why is meekness important to him? Well, the key is understanding the root of meekness. Okay? You see, if pride by definition is self-exaltation, if it's putting yourself above what you actually are, and Jesus says being meek, on the other hand, I want to know what the root of meekness is, because that will help me understand how to become meek and why I'm becoming meek, and how it actually allows you to take what's yours, that is, inherit the land that was promised to you. Inherit very, that is a quote from Psalm 37, verse 11. So what do you have to do? You have to go to Psalm 37. Everyone, please open up their Bibles to Psalm 37 real quickly. I want you to see this with your own eyes. We're not going to read through the whole psalm. It's very long. We're just going to read a few lines from it. That's it. But this will help you understand where Jesus is drawing his statement from. Okay? And this will be a good way of understanding what it means to defeat pride and defeat those who are prideful. Okay? So in Psalm 37, in verse 1 through verses 4, it introduces the material. Now I just want to, let me back up. Let me just say this thing about Psalm 37. It's what we call an acrostic. An acrostic is basically having a certain, every fourth or every fifth line starts with the letter of the Hebrew alphabet in the order of the alphabet. And if we were to do it in English and come up with an acrostic, on the first line of the poem, we would start with the letter A. Fifth line, we would start with the letter B. And 8th, 9th line, we would start with the letter C. That's an acrostic. This, Psalm 37 is an acrostic, and it goes through every one of the Hebrew letters. So structure is important. And it'll help us understand, like, that actually helps us understand why, structure helps us understand the actual reason for what the psalmist is saying. Okay? So it's a structured psalm, it's an acrostic, and if you look, starting at verse 5, what does it say? It says, trust in the Lord and do good. And then what does it say in verse 3. And then verse 4, it says, take delight in the Lord. And then verse 5, it says, commit your way to the Lord. And then verse 7, it says, be still before the Lord. We're going to take out verse 4, and we're just going to read. Let me repeat what it said in each new set of stanzas where a new letter starts. Trust in the Lord and do good. Commit your way to the Lord. Be still before the Lord. Let me repeat. Trust in the Lord and do good. Commit your way to the Lord. Be still before the Lord. Trust in the Lord. Commit your way to the Lord. Be still before the Lord. Okay? The rest of the psalm deals with the first introductory set of lines. It talks about the wicked versus the good. And the wicked are those who are proud. How do we defeat those who are proud? How do we get back the land that was given to us as a people of God? How do we get what we feel we deserve? We trust in the Lord. We commit our ways to the Lord. We sit silent before the Lord. In essence, this is worship. If you sit in the presence of the Lord and take delight in his law, trusting him and loving him and adoring him, that is the basis of Psalm 37. That is also the basis of verse 11 in Psalm 37, where it says, the meek shall inherit the earth. So how do we inherit the earth? How do we take what is ours, so to speak? Or that is, how do we inherit it? We trust in the Lord. We commit our ways to the Lord. We sit silent before the Lord. You see, in essence, to win, Matthew 5:5, when he says, be meek, when Jesus says that, he's drawing from Psalm 37. And if the Jews in their day wanted to have the land that the Romans were occupying, they had to be meek. They didn't have to fight like the Maccabean brothers. That's what the Messiah is telling them. So, really, the answer from Psalm 37 is, in order to defeat the wicked, those who are proud, and in order to defeat pride itself, is worship. But worship starts in the heart. It starts in here. It doesn't start outside. It doesn't start by going into a church building, although that's a part of the process. Worship starts right in your heart. Who is the king of my heart? Is it Jesus or is it me? Am I exalting and adoring Jesus, or am I exalting myself? Am I putting myself above what I actually am, or Or am I just saying, you know what? The top of the ladder is Jesus Christ himself, who is more important than me or any human on this earth. A worshipful heart is one that states who Jesus is and adores him and worships him and loves him for who he is. See, the answer to pride is not necessarily meekness, it's the root of meekness found in Psalm 37. And that's worship. And it's a worship-filled heart, a heart that adores Jesus Christ, who is the King and not us. So let me remind you of who we worship. Okay? Who is it that we actually worship? This is who we worship. The Father who sent his Son Jesus, who is meek enough to come in the form of a servant, meek enough to wash the feet of his own disciples, meek enough to lay down his life for sinners and into the hand of sinners who tortured him, and yet prayed for those who were killing him, praying that God would forgive them, for they know not what they do. Meek, most of all, before the presence of his Father in the Garden of Gethsemane, where he exalted his Father by submitting to the Father's will, knowing that that would cost him his own life. Before Jesus went to his crucifixion, he spent time in the Garden of Gethsemane. He committed his way to the Lord. He sat silent before the Lord. He took delight in the Lord's will. That's how he defeated any pride that would come up and try to fight him and say, well, you're the Son of God, so you might as well take yourself down from that cross. He heard that because they mocked him that way. He had no pride in him, and therefore he's able to defeat it, because what did he do in the garden? He did exactly what you see at the beginning of Psalm 37. And what ended up happening to him after he resurrected? He said this, all authority has been given to me on heaven and on earth. That is, he inherited the earth. When Jesus said, blessed are the meek, for they shall inherit the earth, he's not just saying a truth statement, a timeless truth. It's historical, but he actually inherited the earth. And that's how we defeat pride. We defeat pride by being meek, but we are meek by committing in the Lord, trusting in him, and adoring him in our presence. Every part of every day, worship God with your heart and make him the king of the inner core of who you are. That's how you will defeat him. You will worship him. And on that note, those little sheets of paper that I told you to write down your sin on if you choose to, what you can do is you can either put it in one of the baskets, or at the end of the service, you can take one of these tacks and nail it to the cross. And the ones that go in the baskets will later on be nailed to the cross by us. If you can't walk or make it up here, that's fine. The point is, we are going to nail pride to the cross and every deadly sin that we deal with in the next 6 weeks. Okay? So, start right now by worshiping God enough and submitting to him and taking delight in him. And when that happens, you will see who you are. And you will be able to nail to the cross in the public format your sin. Now, we're not going to read it. We're not going to read your sin. You don't have to. That's between you and Jesus Christ. He's your king. But it will be up here. And we're going to do something with that as time goes on. And on that note,